something from God's Word that will help in our daily walk for Him. We're going to talk to begin with this morning, about biblical interpretation. I'm going to look at a few things that are just very basic to that, and that might help us as we read and try to understand the Scriptures. So one of the first things that call to your attention is that if an interpretation that, like say someone has read the passage and says it means thus and so, if that interpretation contradicts a clear Bible teaching, then one or both interpretations are wrong. And this is, the Scriptures is one thing, one way, one place that that everybody can be right. There is absolute truth. And so if two don't agree on what a passage means, that tells us that either one or the other is wrong, or both is wrong. And so they can't both be right. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are no contradictions in the Bible. So if you are looking at a couple of different passages in the Scriptures and you say, well, this says this and this says this, and they don't agree, it cancels out one or the other. In that case, where there's an apparent contradiction, is one of those places where one or both interpretations is wrong. And so we also want to keep in mind as we read and study the Bible is that the Bible uses literal and figurative language. For the most part, for example, the book of Genesis, it's very straightforward, very, very historically accurate, and it's kind of a book of history of how we got to where the Jewish nation began. And that's pretty literal. Some people like to say that the days of creation weren't days, they were ages. Well, the Bible is very clear that it is and that is a day like you and I would understand it, a 24-hour day. So God made all that is in 6 24-hour days. And so it's not using figurative, it's using literal language. And then you come to books like the book of Revelation, and that's a big mystery to most of us. But that book is highly symbolic, it's highly figurative, and it says right at the beginning that it's figurative language. And so we need to, you might ask, well, how do we know which is which? Well, the big thing is that the context will determine whether it's literal or whether it's figurative. And so we have to pay attention to the kind of language. You have to pay attention to the context that the passage is part of. Another thing to be aware of and to look at when we were trying to gain a proper understanding of the things is who is speaking. We have to identify who is doing the speaking, and then who is spoken to. I just got my Bible open at Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 6. It says, "Now it came to pass when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arabian, and the rest of our enemies heard that I would build the wall, and that there was no breach left therein, though at the time I had not set up the doors upon the gates." This is Nehemiah's writing. He's relating the history of the events that took place when the children in captivity ended and the Jews started to go back to Israel. And this passage has always interested me, that these people, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, were trying to keep the work from progressing in the restoring of the walls of Jerusalem. And verse 2 says that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, "Come, let us meet together in some one of the villages on the plains of Ono." But they thought to do me mischief. So Nehemiah is talking about Sanballat and Geshem in particular, and relationship with them. In verse 3, he says, "I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you?" These men tried to lure Nehemiah away from his work, and he knew by their reputation that they thought to do him mischief. And he says they were on the plains of Ono, is where they wanted to have their meeting. And Nehemiah says, "I'm not coming." And so there we see that Nehemiah is doing the speaking, and he's relating the events that took place. And that's the next thing that we need to be aware of as we try to gain a proper understanding of the Scriptures, is what is the context. And the context of this passage is that Israel, under the leadership of Nehemiah, were rebuilding the walls to the city of Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity. And they're at Jerusalem on the plains of Ono, and Nehemiah was wise enough to say, I'm not going to give you a chance to do me in. And I'm not going to let you take me away from my word. So those are some very important questions and some basic things that we need to remember when we're studying the scriptures. Who is doing the speaking? Who is being spoken to? What is the context that surrounds the passage? And the context of a verse is kind of, it has no bounds. Sometimes it's just a sentence, it's the whole context. Sometimes it's a chapter, sometimes it's a book. And sometimes we gotta have to take it in light of the whole Bible to get the context. But now let's look at some scriptures. The first one we're going to look at is 1 Corinthians chapter 15. First Corinthians chapter 15, we're going to look at verses 23 through 26. First Corinthians 15, verses 23 through 26. It says, "But every man in his own order, Christ the firstfruits, afterwards they that are Christ, that is." Then, verse 24, "Then cometh the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule and all authority and power, for he must reign till he hath put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." The Bible teaches us that Christ will come again. Sometimes we look at the scriptures like in the Old Testament, the scriptures say someone's coming. In the New Testament, in the gospel accounts, the Bible message is someone is here. Then in the rest of the Bible, the context tells us that someone is coming again. And of course, the same one is who it's talking about. It's talking about Christ. But it teaches that Christ is going to come again. We're in the New Testament age, the final age, the end times, if you will. And it tells us that Christ is coming again, but he's only coming again once more. And that's important for us to take note of. Notice with me also 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. First Thessalonians chapter 4, beginning in verse 13. Now, in this passage, Paul was doing the writing. He's the author of this letter. And the Thessalonians were trying to deal with the sin of death and their loved ones. And here in verses 13 through 18, it says, Paul says, by inspiration, "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them that are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. So he says, you've got a loved one that's in the Lord. Just take note of the fact that when Jesus comes, they're going to be resurrected first. There will be the ones that will come with Jesus, and you can take great comfort in knowing that they're not going to be forgotten. They're not going to be neglected. So Christ is going to come again. Does anybody know when? The Bible teaches concerning his coming that it will be public. Some have taught in times past and still do, I assume, that there were several secret comings since Jesus ascended into heaven. But God didn't say through the inspired writers that there's going to be many second comings. He says that there's going to be a time when Jesus comes again. A time, a singular, a time when he comes again. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18, which we just read, he says there, in verse 14, it says, for if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. And we say this unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them that are asleep. Jesus is coming. If you or your loved ones have perished from this, passed from this life, don't worry about it. If in good standings, when they pass from this life, they will be resurrected when Jesus comes again. The Bible also teaches that all will be judged. Not just some, but all people will be judged. Notice Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9, beginning in verse 27. And it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. So Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. So the Hebrew writer says there's going to be a second coming of Christ. And he came and offered himself to bear the sins of the many. He is coming again. And in verse 27, he says, "It is appointed unto men once to die, but after this, the judgment." When he comes, he will bring judgment. He will pass judgment. We will all pass before the judgment seat. And hopefully we'll receive the "well done, thou good and faithful servant." The Bible also teaches that all will arise when he comes again. All. That's not just the saved, but the saved and the unsaved. All will arise when he comes again. Notice John chapter 5. Gospel according to John chapter 5, beginning in verse 28. Jesus is speaking to people, and he says, "Marvel not at this. The hour is coming in the which all that are in the graves shall hear his voice, and shall come forth, they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation." It's going to be quite a day when Jesus comes again. But all of the dead shall rise and be judged. So how are we going to know when the day approaches? It is the day of the second coming. Well, the scriptures tell us that nobody knows the day, an hour, not even Jesus. Only the Father knows. And generations have asked for signs, and Jesus gives us a sign. He says, like Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the whale, Jesus was 3 days in the grave, and he rose again, and he will come again. That's the sign of his coming. Well, that happened a long time ago, and he's still coming. He hasn't quit the journey. But notice with me Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 35. Matthew 24, verse 35. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Jesus continues, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not unto the flood, until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. How would you describe that? Jesus said, it'll be as in the days of Noah. They were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered into the ark. Isn't that going to be like business as usual? I mean, you know, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage, and life goes on. So it's going to be impossible to discern from the signs when an end is near. And that's the way God wanted it. That's the way God designed it. That's God's plan. And so we have the need to be ready when? Today, now. Tomorrow may be late. Perhaps you're here this morning and have found some need to respond to heaven's invitation. Jesus invites all who would to come unto him. And if you have something to respond to heaven's invitation, we would encourage you to come. Let it be known as together we stand and sing.